Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of Twice Removed, or welcome back to Twice Removed. I don't think you've watched this week's before. I'm Natalie. I'm a genealogist. I run genealogy stories and a membership club called the Curious Descendants, which is all about writing your family history. And I know that several of the members are really excited about today's interview because I am joined by an incredible author, Nathan Dylan Goodwin. Hi, Nathan.
Hello.
Hello. Would you mind introducing yourself? Because my guests always do a much better job than I would.
Not sure about that. My name is Nathan Dylan Goodwin. I'm a genealogical crime mystery author. I write and specialise mainly in books connected to genealogy and genetic genealogy. That's
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. I know we've already got quite a few people watching, and I just wanted to say hi, Paul and Jane, who have just said hello to both of us. But I also just wanted to let everybody know that if you have any questions or any comments, please do type them in, and I'll try and bring them up on screen so we can get as many answered as possible. But before you swamp me with your questions, I'm going to get in a few of my own, and hopefully pick up a writing tip or two. So what came first, Nathan? Did doing your family tree, or sort of some sort of genealogy activity, come first, or and lead to the writing, or were you a writer first who then found genealogy? Like, which kind of, how did it
Which way
happen?
round? Yeah.
Yeah.
It started with genealogy. So I've been doing it since I was about 12. I started with my grandmother's maiden name, which was the Dengate family, eventually branching into all parts of my family tree. But I started with that, and that's kind of been the core of my research. I registered it as a one-name study years ago, and I do the DNA study group as well. Genealogy was running for a very long time as a hobby, while I did all kinds of other random jobs. And then it was actually about 2003, I was in Hastings Library looking through these big observers, these newspapers, looking for Dengates in particular. And I thought, this is really interesting because the town actually suffered really badly in the Second World War. And I thought, there's a book in this, but a non-fiction book, kind of just telling the story of the town. It was bombed really heavily, and it was all affected with evacuation and all sorts. So I set about writing a non-fiction book, which became Hastings at War. So that was my first proper foray into writing. I'd done a couple of magazine articles and things. I think one was for Family Tree magazine years and years ago. But this was the first proper thing. And on the back of that, I did a second volume in a similar vein, and then decided I really loved the writing process generally and wanted to try fiction writing. So I did a part-time master's degree in creative writing, and pretty well straight away started writing what would become Hiding the Past, so the first book in the series. And I didn't really intend it to be anything published, or definitely didn't see it as a series. So I kept going on it, and my classmates really enjoyed the story and were encouraging me to write more and more. So pretty well the entire time of that 2-year course, I was working on this story that would become Hiding the Past. So yeah, that's kind of how it happened, and the two have continued since, genealogy and writing, and I now can merge them, which is fantastic.
So nowadays, what kind of sparks your ideas? Do the characters pop into your head first, or the storyline? And is the storyline kind of come from your own research, and then everything kind of grows from that, or kind of like what's the process? How does it work?
It's usually the story that comes first. So the ideas for each of the Morton books are there's an undercurrent that goes through the whole series of Morton's backstory, but actually each book is a standalone, separate case that Morton has to solve by the end of the book. And those stories generally come from like research that I'm doing in my own family tree or just happened upon. So, for example, the last book, The Sterling Affair, that came from an email from the National Archives just saying that some new spy records from the Cold War had been released for the first time that were previously classified. And I just thought, wow, that would be a really interesting story because they, a spy by nature, obviously hiding their identity and doing all these, illicit undercover things. And so I thought it'd be a really good story for Morton to try and work out who this spy is. And so that then became the catalyst for the story. And I then do more research. Then characters start to come out of the real documents. So occasionally I use real people in the stories, but usually the main characters are fictional, but they're based on people I've uncovered. So yeah, it kind of comes from that way. And the Chester Creek Murders, so the new series I started, that came really from the Golden State Killer being captured in America using genetic genealogy. And I thought, wow, I've got to do something in that vein, but we don't do that over here. So I knew it had to be a new series set in America, American characters. So that was the catalyst there. So yeah, it's usually the story that comes first, then the research, and then the characters come from that.
And how challenging was it to move to America? I mean, because obviously the Morton books are set somewhere you're quite familiar with. So
Mm-hmm.
how difficult was it to move to America? Were you quite familiar with the place where it was being set, or did you have to go over there and stay, or like how did you tackle that?
So it was a bit tricky actually. So I decided that the team that are going to solve, I'm hoping it'll be a series. So a team that solve these cold case murders using genetic genealogy, they're based in Salt Lake City. And I had been there several times because of Roots Tech. And so when I realized that I would want to do this book set there, the last time I was out, in fact, the last two times, I was doing research. I was looking for where their office was going to be and going to restaurants and all these difficult things, going skiing and doing all these, very difficult research
It's a
tasks.
really
With
hard life you lead there.
really hard, yes, eating and drinking and skiing and having lots of fun, all in the name of research. So yes, I did research on the ground there. Actually, one of the hardest things was deciding whether to write the story in with American spellings or English spellings. And once I decided I actually would do American spellings, was actually kind of trying to stick to that. Like lots of people know that there's a different way of saying trunk and boot and all those kinds of things and different spellings, but there were lots of ways that Americans would say something like we would say we're driving down the M25. They would say we're driving down I-15. They wouldn't say the. And so I was quite lucky that I had lots of my early readers were American, so they would say, we don't say it like that. We don't say we're going to get some coffee. We're just going to say we're going to get coffee, or so it's all those little
That's really
things
interesting.
yeah, it's those things that threw me. But I think I got there by the end. So
Did you have to kind of learn some colloquialisms as well, like just sort of little sayings,
yeah, and lots of the early readers were really good at saying, we would probably say this in that context, or you could say this, or that's definitely. I don't know what it is, but over here, like I just know lots of people that, in a friendly way, call a friend by their surname, like Mr. Goodwin. They would say, just in a friendly, "What are you doing there, Mr. Goodwin?" And I had that in the book, and they said we just don't do that over here, so they would come up with things that I could say, and also things that I shouldn't be saying. So
I think it's a really good tip there, because I think even if you're not writing fiction, I think if you're writing about your ancestors' lives, trying to imagine how they would have spoken and what they would have said and the way they would have said things, because obviously language has changed a lot over time as well.
Totally,
so even if it's just reading some novels set in the time period that you're writing about, I think it is those small things that make quite a massive difference in believability, don't they? I guess So generally, I think I really notice, especially with the Morton books, that places seem to be really important in your novels. Or I always kind of really get a really strong sense of place when I'm reading. Is that is that something that's quite important to you? And you know, when you visit them, what kind of notes do you make to kind of make sure that it like, do you draw maps and things like that?
Yeah. So the location is really important. And because of that, I live in Kent and I'm from Sussex. So generally the books are based, the Morton part at least is based in Kent and Sussex. I'm a little bit lazy, so it just saves me having to go too far to do my research. But it's really important to get it right. When I started Hiding the Past, actually, I based it in the very first draft in a fictional location. And then I just thought, why am I doing this? Let's just base it somewhere real where people can identify with, and I can go there and actually, I always, when I go to these places, I take lots of notes, draw maps of the locations, take photos, choose an exact house that somebody would have lived in, and I then look at where the things in relation to that. And it's really important, and I find that storyline can come out of that as well. Like if he goes into a cafe nearby, and there's just things that come from being in the location. So yeah, it's really important.
So can we look forward to like a Morton tour one day, or is there already a Morton tour?
That would be
This is the
really good.
house, and that would be really fun.
Yeah, well, actually, you can stay in his house. It's on Airbnb, and I did for the first time about 2 months ago, and it was amazing. Totally
Oh
different to how I
wow.
describe it, and totally different to how I imagined it. But yeah, so there could be a Morton tour. Yeah,
That
starting
would
at
be
his house and yeah, wandering around Rye.
that would be great. That would be great. So,
Hmm.
as well as places, uh, your depiction of the archives made well, it certainly made me smile, and I think it probably made a lot of people smile. How much do you base your visits to Morton's visit to the archives on your own experiences of visiting the archives?
So it's pretty well completely how I experience it goes into the book, for better or worse. Um, Again, it's really important for me to get that right. So down to what happens when you arrive at reception, what details they want from you and how you sign in and where the lockers are, and I need that to be right so that readers can say, yeah, that is an accurate depiction. And so, yeah, I mean, one of the archivists who appears in lots of the books, Deirdre Latimer, she's in the East Sussex Record Office. She is based on a real a real person there. Um, I don't know. I think I probably, if I go in to do genealogy, I'll take a document and I'll spend a long time poring over the records. But if I'm doing it for the book, I tend to take a document, and it's more about the process of how long it takes to come, what does it look like, what's inside. Once I've established that, the content I'm going to make fiction, and so I hand it back again and I want the next one, and I think they're like, for goodness sake, I'm just there, what next document, and they must be thinking, you're not a serious researcher if you can go through an entire document in like 3 minutes. So I think I annoy them a bit. But yeah, but also, like, when I did the research for the Sterling Affair, I went to the West Sussex Record Office, and they were just amazing. They just bent over backwards for me. They're really good, and so that's what happens in the book with Morton. He has a good experience there. And in the acknowledgements at the end, I say to them, thank you. It was really a pleasure to go there.
I wonder how many archives have got a little photo of
Yeah,
of
under the
Nathan on a
table.
back cover, like watch when he comes in. It's like getting a restaurant critic, isn't it?
Yeah,
We don't want
I
to
think
end
it
up
could
as a
be.
Deirdre character.
Yeah.
Paul's
Well,
just said Paul's just said even he feels terrified of facing Deirdre.
you would be, Paul. Yeah, she's quite a character. She's still there, I think.
So another thing that I think you did really, really well is, obviously when you're searching for somebody in the archives, like you say, it can be quite a long process to trawl through a document.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it always seems like you give a really accurate depiction of the research that's involved or the type of documents that are going to be looked at, but without it becoming boring. Um, you know,
Thank you.
when you say yeah, well, when you say it's a genealogy, and I must admit this was a little bit of a barrier for me before I picked up the first book. I kind of thought, But how's that going to work? Because, you spend like 6 hours looking through, I don't know,
Yeah,
workhouse
it
settlement
sounds really
records.
boring.
Like, how are you going to, yeah, I don't get it. Is it good? And then I was like, yeah, I just don't understand. And then I read the book and I was like, ah. But for anyone who's not read any of them, how do you tackle keeping the detail in, and making it realistic, but without, saying, I found this birth, then I found the baptism, and it was it, because I think a lot of us, when
Yeah.
we write up our family history, can fall into that trap quite easily as well. We want to
Hmm.
put all the evidence in, and in doing so, sometimes we put
Yeah.
everything in, and it becomes a big long list of facts. So
Mm-hmm.
well done. How did you do it?
Thank you. Yeah, it is a difficult one because again, I want it to be realistic because none of us ever walk into an archive and find on the first page of the first document we order what we want, and it's all really quick, and it isn't really like Who Do You Think You Are, is it? It's much more laborious and time consuming, and sometimes you spend a day and you don't find what you're looking for. So I try and strike that balance between not making it too boring to read. So in the Chester Creek murders, I would, because that's very laborious what they're doing, creating multiple trees. I switch characters, so that's a quick and easy way of just saying, and then you can come back to that one, and it's kind of it is 6 hours later that they found what they're looking for. With Morton, who's researching by himself, I tend to show the document arriving, for example, in an archive, and then he'll look at it, show the reader what that contains, an example of what's in there, and perhaps something amusing or something like that. And then I will then say he keeps searching, can't find what he's looking for, and then if it's still ongoing, he doesn't find it, I'll say 3 hours later, Morton was, he still hadn't found what he's looking for. 3 hours later, he found the thing he was searching for. But I think, regards to what you're saying with our own family histories, when we're writing up real things, I agree. I think there's a real problem of getting swamped by, I know all this information, I know their birthday, I know their baptism date, I know where they were living, so I'm going to put it all in. But I think a potential way of solving that is to use footnotes. So have a footnote to say this is the baptism date and location, and here's all the information. But actually, what somebody who's not a genealogist needs to know is just they're born in 1871, and actually, what's more interesting, I think, is what life was like, what life would have been like for them. To set the social context more than to go on about the facts of the matter. That's just my
No,
opinion,
no,
though.
I completely agree. I did a little talk on, for Historians Collaborate, on the importance of storytelling in family history, and that was kind of one of my main points. When you talk to
Yeah,
somebody in real life, if I was to tell you about, the time that somebody died or passed away or something, I don't start the story with, well, they were born on such and
yeah,
such date, and they were baptized
yeah,
on such and such day, and then they died
hmm
on this day, and now I feel
yeah.
sad. You don't tell a story like that. So why would you tell
No,
your family history like that?
totally.
You tell it with stories. So no, I
Hmm.
completely agree. And the other way that I've seen people do it is, to write the story and then have, perhaps an appendix at the end, which is a table
Yes,
of all the events that they found and all the
yeah,
sources in one kind of
mm.
factual biography kind of
Yeah.
sheet at the end, which say, yeah, or footnotes. I think that both of those methods
It's
work really, really well. Um,
it's important to have those, the sources, of course, but I think
yeah,
it can swamp the detail of the character, the person's life.
yeah, no, I agree. And actually, when you read, a lot of history books, they don't tend to have the sources right there in the text as if it
No.
was an essay. If they tend to have them
Hmm.
at the back as footnotes,
Yeah.
or endnotes even.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, no, I agree. So actually, that leads me on nicely to my next question. So how important is the historical context, do you think, of the, genealogy, of the characters you depict, the ones from the past, the things that they're
Yes.
discovering? Because
Yeah.
one of the things that I thought was quite interesting is, certainly, sometimes they're almost like little vinaigrettes of characters,
Hmm.
and the story might be about the impact of the actions that they did, that they did on today. But
Yes.
even in
Yeah.
those kind of brief moments, you still feel like they're in context, and you kind of know who they were even though they might be quite brief. It's very clever, and I just wondered how important that was and how you tackle that.
Yeah, it's really important. So each of the books has got a different past narrative time frame. So Second World War, First World War, Victorian times, Edwardian, and so I spend a very long time, like up to 3 months, doing my research, which includes a historical context. So I buy lots and lots of too many books, and I do lots of research on the internet to really establish what life was like generally, never mind the story. If I'm going to set something in the Second World War, I'll look at just general life in the Second World War, then start to hone it down and be more specific. So, for example, the fourth book, The America Ground, that was set in 1820s in Sussex. And so I spent a lot of time just generally looking at life in the 1820s in England, then looking at Sussex, which obviously included the Sussex dialect, and that then provided me with words and phrases and ways of saying things for the characters. And then I'll then look at specifically what was going on in the America Ground itself and how did it come to be about. And yes, it's really important to get that right. And if I get the research stage right, for including the genealogy and everything, then the book tends to write itself, not be too onerous a task, and really enjoyable because I've done that work to set it up.
And do you do all that? Do you kind of plot your stories out? Do the research, plot your stories out, and then write, or do you tend to do a bit of all three kind of together? Or
yeah, it's a mixture really. So when I very first started out, like with Hide in the Past and the second book, The Lost Ancestor, I was very much trying to know everything before I started. Well, how's this going to go, and how's it going to end, and how? And then I started to relax a bit after that, and just kind of trust that it would work out. So now I would say, so for the Sterling affair, the most recent one, I probably knew about 60% of it before I started, and I knew very roughly the character arcs that I would like them all to go on. But there were lots of points I think I don't know at the beginning. I didn't know how those things would link up or how that particular thing would end. So there are lots of loose ends, but I find that they generally, and it's a bit of a cliche, but the characters do take the story where they want to go. And it's a very strange thing to say, but they do. Something that in the morning when I woke up, I had no idea that this character was going to do this thing, but I'm writing and that's what's happening. And and so sometimes I have to stop. I got to a point in the Sterling affair where I needed to pause, do some more plotting. I had to go to the Churchill archives in Cambridgeshire to do some more research, to then come back to continue writing. So it's quite fluid, and I try not to pin myself down to, I kind of just have an instinct of I've done enough research, I've done enough plotting to at least make a start on it. And something's going right there, because when I come to do the editing, I don't have to do really heavy cutting and pasting and shifting of chapters. So it seems to be working.
It's really funny how different writers work in so many different ways. I can't remember, because I've heard writers before say, that their characters spoke to them or led them in a certain direction, and then I can't remember which author it is, but there is another author that said, when my characters do that, I tell them to shut up. So they obviously work in a really structured way, and it obviously varies so widely. It's always really fascinating, I think, to hear about other people's processes and how they work. So, talking about different time periods as well, do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite time period?
I think it's probably the Second World War. I don't really know why. I think it's just because I suppose it's in fairly recent living memory, and like my grandparents were able to talk about it. But I'm totally not, I'm not a fan of war in the slightest. But it just appeals to me, particularly not the military aspects of it. Actually, it's more the effect on the general population. The home front that kind of thing, and that big effect that it had on the nation. So, yeah, I think that's my favorite time period.
Yeah, I can understand that. The Second World War almost feels within, like, just at the edge of your fingertips. You can't
Yes,
quite go
exactly.
back there,
Yeah.
Richard, but it's
Hmm.
familiar enough for it to almost be
Yeah.
there. It's
Yeah.
and like, I've my grandparents were children during the Second World War, so it's
Mm.
almost within living memory. Not quite mine, but it's on the
Exactly.
edge.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. When I
So
was
do you?
doing the, sorry,
No, sorry. Go on. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, when I was doing the interviewing, I interviewed about 50 people for when I did Hastened at War. I mean, most of them have since died. So I'm very glad I did that. But that again, it just made it feel really tangible. It just,
Mm.
that these people experienced all these, horrific and funny and all kinds of events that went on. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's one of the reasons I really like my great great grandparents as well, because sorry, my great grandparents, because most of them died when I was sort of 10 or 11. So I was quite lucky. I knew three out of the three of them. And they almost feel really tangible because my grandparents
Yeah.
talk about them, and
Hmm.
sometimes the generation before that they talk about a little bit as well. So there's that kind of familiarity, but
Yeah.
not enough to become complacent. That just kind of just slightly out of reach,
Yeah.
enough to be really interesting. So yeah, no, I completely agree. Um, so do you have a favorite ancestor then? If you like the Second World War, if you got a favorite ancestor?
Well, obviously, I love them all equally and dearly. Um, but I hope they'll forgive me when I say they're all a bit samey, my ancestors. They're all very, they're white and they're from South England and they were generally agricultural labourers or, working on the land. So I think one of my favourites is probably my great great grandmother, Louisa Rokes, because she was born in St. Helena, so the tiny island that's off of the west coast of Africa. Um, and she interests me because she's a very mixed heritage. So she was born in 1871 there. Her paternal grandfather was a white slave owner. He had three slaves on the island, but her maternal grandmother was a black slave. And it's just that heritage is really interesting, and it actually comes through into my DNA. I can pinpoint exactly in my ethnicity. I've got this. It's a low portion, but of South Asia, and it's really interesting because the South Asia part covers southern India and Sri Lanka, and that's where the East India Company would take their slaves from and then take them round to St Helena. That East India Company were running the island from about the 1600s for the British government, and so that heritage is within her, and it's still there in a tiny amount in me. And it's very difficult though to do the research. So
Mm.
most of the island's archives are only available on the island. So I'm paying a small fortune to the archivist on the island to give me what they've got, which isn't that there's not that much to it. But I'd love to find the slave ancestors. But obviously, once they were taken from southern India and Sri Lanka area to the island, they were given anglicized names, and so I don't know that I'll ever be able to make the connection back. But yeah, so she stands out for me as being one of the more interesting ancestors.
Yeah, I bet. And DNA is amazing that way, I think, as well, isn't it?
Hmm.
That if the paperwork has been lost, even if you can't find the exact person, at least you can begin to find the location and look at the history of
Yes,
that place,
yeah,
and the people within that place, and know that somebody there was yours, if you know what I mean, and is still there with
exactly.
you
Yeah,
in a way, is
yeah.
passed on. So, have you been quite an early adopter of DNA analysis?
Yes, yeah. So in the third book in the Morton series, so the Orange Lilies, which is set in December 2014, Morton takes a DNA test, and I basically wrote the process that I had to do, because back then you couldn't take DNA tests in England through Ancestry. So I ordered a kit in America to go to my friend in America. She posted it to me. I took the DNA test, posted it back to her, and she posted it to Ancestry. So I got to have a DNA test really early on. And I think, yeah, it's really always fascinated me, and I think that's come through the books as well. So Morton is using DNA more and more, as we all do in real life, you know. So it's kind of started back then in 2014 and has just increased. So in the last book, in the Sterling Affair, there's quite a lot of DNA analysis, and obviously Chester Creek Murders is completely based around solving a cold case murder, trying to find a serial killer just from his DNA. So I really had to make sure, you know, I knew my stuff for that book, and it's been really heartening to hear lots of the top people in the industry saying that is correct. It was accurate depictions, and actually several people have said that they've been on DNA courses, and the person running the course has said to read that book because that's kind of a textbook example of how to do it. It's not a textbook. It's a fiction, but the process is accurate.
That's amazing. Well done. No, like
Yeah,
I think that's
thanks.
brilliant.
Yeah, I really love it.
That's no mean feat to make a DNA analysis both understandable and entertaining.
It was tricky.
Yeah. Yeah, in written word, I mean, I think it's a bit different when you're listening to somebody speak, because obviously they can bring up the visuals and they can use their personality to kind of convey things, you know. But when you're doing it in writing, that's really challenging. So I think that's brilliant. I'm trying to think how to word it. Did your once you'd done the DNA, obviously, you know, if you were new to if you were taking it right when it was new, and there wasn't so much help and advice about, did you kind of have to like suss out how to use it yourself, or did your DNA kind of sit there a little bit dormant and just there as an ethnicity report until it kind of exploded with more matches and that advice became available?
Yeah, so I remember when I first had the results back, it was it wasn't particularly useful because obviously mainly only Americans had taken the test. So my results, I think my closest matches were kind of in the 3rd to 5th cousin bracket, and they were really obscure as well. Like I think they were more in the 5th cousin bracket, to be honest, rather than the 3rd. So it wasn't the cousin matches wasn't particularly useful to me because I just couldn't work out, you know, how they connected. It was so far back. And the ethnicity reports actually were quite off. I know we have to take them with a little bit, you know, of a pinch of salt, the ethnicity reports even now, but they've definitely improved hugely. I'm sure my first one came back as 67% Northwest Europe, which didn't even include Britain. And I was thinking, this doesn't match my paper trail in the slightest. And I was something like, I think I was something less than 10% British. And I was like, this is very big revelation. And then obviously it's, you know, improved over the time and changed. And now it kind of pretty well matches my paper trail. And obviously the cousin matches have improved. And I added to that over the years as well with I got my mum tested, I got my grandmother tested, I've got cousins and aunts, and you know, so I've added to that so that I can start to see, well, I've got this huge bank of 3rd to 5th cousins, but how are they connecting? You know, on which side are they being, you know, relating to me? So yeah, it's improved a lot, let's just say.
That multiple testing makes such a big difference, doesn't it? Because I
really
I started off testing myself. I was curious, and I actually wrongly assumed that I knew my mum would be happy to do one, and she did, and that was great. But I kind of wrongly assumed that my nan and granddad, who are on my dad's side, would not want to take one. I kind of just thought that they wouldn't be comfortable with it, because my nan had kind of voiced some sort of like, oh, I don't know about all that kind of thing, and having your name on a database didn't make sense. So based on that, I just kind of assumed that they wouldn't be interested, and wouldn't agree, and I didn't want to approach them about it. And then one day I was just talking about it, and they went, "Oh yeah, we'd happily take one." And I was like,
Oh, wow.
"Okay." So I ran out and get the kits and did it. Yeah. I just changed mine, and actually they were absolutely fine. They were, I'd completely. It just goes to show, a little tip for somebody there: don't assume.
Don't assume, definitely.
That you know your nan's mind, because
Yeah.
If your nan's anything like mine, it won't be what you expect.
Yeah,
Um,
my nan did it for me, but bless her, she was just so struggling to fill the test tube up.
yeah, yeah. No, right,
Yeah,
yeah,
it took a long
definitely.
time, but yeah, I've got her DNA, which is good.
Yeah, I've got a kit that's been sat on my side for at least a year, for my great uncle to test, because my great grandmother was illegitimate, and she put down the name of her father on her marriage certificate. Um, never been really convinced. We're never really sure whether he is actually her father though, or whether that's
Hmm.
just who she was told he was. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just a bootmaker in Cardiff, so it's not no one, nothing fancy made up. But I
Hmm.
don't know, I'm just not like 100%. And there's nothing in my DNA results or my mum's to kind of narrow it down um, enough, especially not with it being Welsh. So
Hmm.
I need to get my great uncle to take that DNA
Do it.
test. It's just
Do
been
it.
sat there. I know Paul Chiddix thinks that I'm organised, and Paul, I'm not organised. I've had a DNA kit sat on my shelf for over a year because I hadn't made it to the post. So yeah. Um, so how much have you used your own family tree in your books? Or is it more those kind of general ideas like you mentioned, kind of that spring out of you? For example, the email from the National Archives.
So that it's generally my family, as I've said, isn't as quite as exciting as the cases that Morton gets up to, unfortunately. But the one that's closest to anything in my family tree is the Spyglass files, the one set in the Second World War. So it's very, very loosely based on my grandmother's story. So she and my grandfather married in December 1940, and he then went off to war and was captured in Singapore in January 42, and he was prisoner of war till for the whole duration until the war finished. But my grandmother managed to give birth in March 1943 to a daughter who clearly wasn't my grandfather's, um, and put the child up for adoption. And nobody in the family knew anything until about 2015. So yeah, that kind of inspired because I got to meet my new half aunt, and I got to look through her adoption file and looked at all these original documents that obviously most of the time we're not privy to because it's obviously closed to the public, and that kind of inspired the story of Elsie Finch in the Spyglass file. And again, like lots of the documents that I found that I had looked at from my half aunt, they were used in there. And it is a fictional story. It's not her story, but it's very loosely based on it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a great example, though.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I've just noticed the time, and I just wanted to give everyone a chance to, if anyone wants to pop in with a question, please do, because we've only got sort of 15, 20 more minutes with Nathan, and I know that people are always a bit nervous to comment first with their first question. So just want to encourage you to please do go for it. So the new book, do you think you'll return to Morton at all, or do you think Morton's wrapped up?
Oh no, he's not wrapped up. I've been plotting up to book 13 actually. So the next one, so Morton 9, that's in the editing stage right now. So it's finished. It's just come back from the first editor who really enjoyed it. So it's now back to me to reread it and check it and edit it again, and then it will go out to my early readers, and they'll give me their feedback. And so yeah, hopefully only be a couple of months and it'll be out, and then I'll be starting the next one in the Venator series, so the follow-up to Chester Creek. But no, there's plenty of Morton yet. I've got so many ideas. Don't
And
worry.
do you enjoy both of the books? Do you enjoy writing both those different series as much as each other, or do they kind of compete with each other in your desire to write, or is there one that kind of is kind of you know edging forward?
I really enjoy both, and even though they're obviously very heavily based around genealogy, so there's lots of things that are similar. I think because they're dealing with completely different aspects and are set in different countries and different characters, they're different enough for me to want to do both. And like they don't compete in that way. But I very much am looking forward to getting on with having just done a Morton. I'm very much looking forward to getting back to the team in Salt Lake City. But I know when I'm writing that, I'll be thinking, but I want to get back to more. And so that's the way I kind of work. I very much enjoy the thing I'm writing, but I don't think I'm really looking forward to getting back to the next one. So, which is a good thing. So I think if I ever don't enjoy it, then I won't continue. But I've certainly got a lot of ideas for both series. Yeah, so
I noticed on your website as well, and I think I must have missed it during lockdown, but I noticed on your website that you've got the Morton in Lockdown free book available, where it's like where it's one of those old-fashioned choose your own adventure. And I absolutely loved that. I was doing it the other day, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's such a good idea for family history. Although for my lot, I just thought it would be every choice would probably lead to workhouse. Oh no, you're both wrong. Prison. But I thought that was such a good idea. What kind of gave you that idea to play around with the story in that way?
So, well, it was just exactly when lockdown happened. I was thinking, what would Morton be doing now? And I was writing. I'd started writing the Chester Creek murders, and I thought this is kind of a one-off opportunity to, if I'm going to do something lockdown based, it needs to be now. So I paused on the Chester Creek murders and started doing this lockdown thing. And I was thinking, but if I start writing Morton in lockdown as a traditional book, even if it was just an ebook or something, it won't be out for several months. And obviously naively thought, like everybody, that lockdown would be quite short and we'd be, all out of it quite quickly. And I was thinking by that point, people are not going to want to, it won't be relevant anymore. So I thought, I want to write something quite quickly, but that can be put out pretty well the second it's finished. And so I thought, I loved those books when I was younger, those choose your own adventures. Yeah, so you get to the bottom of the page and it says, go and fight the dragon, turn to page 24, or do you want to go back to the cave, and I thought I could do a really mini case where Morton is at home, like everybody, and he has to solve some sort of a case. And it was a real challenge actually to do it, because obviously for each end of a story part, there were 2 or 3 options, and then each of those 2 or 3 options had 2 or 3 options, and I rolled out this huge sheet of wallpaper on my writing room floor, and it was just this massive, like an inverted family tree. It was just huge, and it got so complicated. I mean, obviously some of the options, they linked back to each other. Obviously I couldn't write everything having 3 options, so I basically made one. It was in parts, so I had part 1 to 6. It was the way through to the end, and then there are different other options. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and it was the first opportunity I've had to include real documents and like fabricated documents, but there's pictures in there, and there's links to websites and links to records, and it's really nice to be able to do that, so people, while they're reading, can go, oh, I just click and have a look, I didn't realize that was there. So
yeah,
I really enjoyed it.
I thought it was a brilliant idea, and I thought it would be a really, really good idea. Good way. Sorry, my puppy is crying, so the girl's dad is whisking the puppy away to rescue me. That's why I've been slightly, if I've seemed slightly off, that's why. Yeah, no, I thought it was a really good idea, and I thought it would lend itself to family history really, really well, actually, and exploring the past. And if I can find it for the show notes, re-find it for the show notes, I did come across a writing group that were doing a choose your own adventure story, but as like a wiki that anybody could jump in and join in and write, so it would be
good
really
idea.
massive. Yeah, I thought it was a really good idea. I thought it would work really well in the family history community. So you never know, watch this, but if I ever get any free time, tap you up, Nathan, and go hello. And yeah, I'll come and find it. It looked really interesting. And just whilst we've been talking, actually, Melanie has just popped in with a question where she said, based on your writing experiences, do you have any tips for writing interesting family history in terms of blending fiction with fact? Yeah.
So blending fiction with fact. Yeah, I mean, that's what I try to do in the books, is try to have a mixture. Particularly as the books have gone on, I now actively try to include real people and real scenarios. I would say try and choose an ancestor that really does interest you, that's done something interesting or lived in interesting times, and then do as much reading around that person. So if you know they're living in a certain place at a certain time, really look at what life was like for them back then, what was going on in the world and in the country it took place, and then try and build them into it. It really depends on who your reader is going to be as well. So if you're just doing it for yourself and you want to try and put one of your ancestors into a fictional story, then I would really go for it. Read books that are set during that time as well, so you kind of get a feel for language and kind of what was going on historically at the time. And then really just let it, try it out and let it run. Let that character come to life and see how it goes. If you're not trying to be completely factual, then I would say just really relax and enjoy it and get writing.
I completely agree, and I think just keep writing, because I think it will come.
Yeah, I
Practice is
think
one of
people
those.
get
It's
really bogged
like a
down
muscle,
with.
isn't it?
Yeah, I think people get bogged down with the idea. Not even bogged down; they get a bit daunted by the idea of starting it. It's like, well, how am I going to do it? I would say do your research and then put your character into that research, and they will start to come to life, and you'll go with the flow.
And if anyone wants to read your books and also other books that incorporate kind of genealogy, is there anywhere they can go to find that? To find
Yeah, so
your books and also a list of other possible titles.
yeah, so I've set up a group on Facebook along with MJ Lee, Wendy Percival, and Stephen Molyneux. So we all write genealogical crime mysteries. It's called the Genealogical Crime Mystery Book Club. So if you search for us on Facebook, there's quite a few people on there, and there are a list of books. There are suggestions people have read, and how they're recommending different titles. But it's a small niche, but it's a growing genre. There are quite a few of us out there now, so I would say definitely try those authors. And Steve Robinson is another good one to try. So all kind of doing similar thing where there's some kind of a crime has happened and the main character is using genealogy to solve it.
Right. And where can people find out a bit more about you and your books in particular?
So the best place to go would be my website, which is nathandylangoodwin.com. And that's kind of got all the books and blurbs and reviews and references and links to the different ways of purchasing them. So they're all in Audible, Kindle, and paperback. And there's also links to all my social media stuff and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all the rest of it. So that's the best place to go. Yeah, nathandylangoodwin.com.
Okay. And I noticed you've done the Audible editions, which is great because I love audiobooks. And have you ever been tempted to narrate it yourself?
No.
Fair enough.
No. I just think the people I've got doing them, they're professional voice actors, whereas I think my voice droning on just wouldn't be very exciting. So
I'm sure that's not the case, but it is a real skill, isn't it? It's a real.
It is,
it
yeah.
can really bring a book to life.
And they're really good as well at doing the different characters. I think I don't know how I would sound as an old lady, really.
I'd quite like to hear you try, but I won't make you do it live over the internet.
Thank you.
On that note, I should probably wrap up. Thank you so much, Nathan. for answering my rather rambling questions and coming and chatting to me. I really enjoyed it. And
Thank you. So did I.
yeah, I look forward to carrying on. I've got lots of your novels to catch up on. I'm quite a late adopter, so I'm really pleased that I gave them a chance and discovered them, because I was
Thank
really
you.
pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed them. So thank you so much. And
Thank you.
yeah, I will end the broadcast and let you get on with your evening. But after the show, there'll be the usual loading of this onto the podcast as well, but also there'll be a accompanying blog post, which will be over at www.genealogystories.co.uk on the twice removed section. And I will make sure I've got a link to Nathan's site and all his books, but also any of the other resources that we've mentioned will be on there, and probably some links to some really good writing sites as well. So I will see you all in a fortnight.
Bye.